Hello, everyone. Well, it's time to How to Train Your Dragon, chapters 12 through 17. I hope you enjoy this because it's getting exciting. Oh, you want to know where we left Hiccup off? We left Hiccup off going to see the gigantic, monstrous dragon. Okay, sea serpent dragon, because he's the only one that can speak Dragonese. And if he does this without dying, he can come back and join the tribe again and not go into exile. So he said he'll do it. So let's see if he can do it. Let's pull up the slides. There we go. All right. How to Train Your Dragon. Chapter 12. The Green Death. It is one thing to approach a primeval nightmare when you are part of a crowd of 400 people. It's quite another to do so on your own. Hiccup had to force himself to put one foot in front of the other. Stoic offered to send a guard of his finest soldiers, but Hiccup preferred to go alone. Less chance of anybody doing anything heroic and stupid, he said. I know he said stupid, it's okay. Although this is the part of the story that the bards tend to focus on as the bit where Hiccup was particularly heroic, I do not agree. It is a lot easier to be brave when you know you have no alternative. Hiccup knew in his heart of hearts that the monster intended to kill them all anyway, so he didn't have a lot to lose. Nonetheless, he was sweating as he peered over the edge of the cliff. There, below him, was the impossibly large dragon filling up the beach. It appeared to be asleep. But an eerie singing was coming from the direction of its belly. The song went something like this. Watch me, great destroyer, as I settle down to lunch. Killer whales are tasty 'cause they've got a lot of crunch. Great white sharks are scrumptious, but here's a little tip. These teeny weeny pointy teeth can give a nasty nip. How odd, thought Hiccup. He can sing with his mouth shut? Hiccup nearly jumped clear out of his leggings when the dragon opened both his crocodile eyes and spoke directly to him. Why so odd? Said the dragon, who appeared to be amused. A dragon with his eyes shut is not necessarily asleep, so it follows that a dragon with his mouth shut is not necessarily singing. All is not what it seems. That noise that you hear is not me at all. That, my hero, is the sound of a singing supper. A singing supper? Echoed Hiccup, quickly remembering that you should never ever look into the eyes of a large, malevolent dragon like this one. He fixed his gaze firmly on one of the dragon's talons instead. And this was a mistake, as Hiccup suddenly realized that the dragon was holding a herd of pathetically bleated sheep captive under one massive claw. He pretended to allow one of them to escape, let the poor animal practically reach the safety of the rocks, then pick it up by its wool with a delicate pincer movement and toss it way, way up into the air. This was a trick Hiccup had often done himself, but with blackberries. Now the dragon threw back his great head, and the woolly speck flew down into the terrible jaws, which closed behind it with a mighty crash. There was a horrible sound of crunching as he chewed and swallowed the unfortunate sheep. The dragon saw Hiccup watching him in fascinated horror, and he brought his ridiculously enormous head down closer to the boy. Hiccup nearly passed out as his offense dragon breath poured out in a disgusting yellow-green vapor. It was the stench of death itself, a deep head-spitting stench of decaying matter, of rotting haddock heads and sweating whale, of long-dead shark and despairing souls. The revolting sting curled its way around the boy in repellent coils and wormed its way up into his nose until he coughed and spluttered. Some people say you should debone a sheep before you eat it, sneered the dragon confidently. But I think it adds just a nice crunch to what would otherwise be a bit of a soggy meal. The dragon burped. Ugh. The belch came out as a perfect loop of fire that soared through the air like a smoke ring and landed on the heather surrounding Hiccup, setting it alight so that for a moment he was standing right in the middle of a circle of bright green flames. The heather was damp, however, and the blaze flared for only a few moments, then extinguished itself. Oops, giggled the dragon evilly. Pardon me, a little party trick. He then placed one gigantic claw against the edge of the cliff that Hiccup was standing on. Humans, however, continued the dragon thoughtfully, humans really should be filleted. The spine in particular can be very tickly as it goes down the throat. And as the dragon spoke, he extended his claws, the talons slowly emerging from the thick stumps of his fingers and rising up until they resembled nothing more than a gigantic razors, 6 feet wide and 20 feet long, with points on the end like a surgeon's scalpel. Removing the human backbone is a delicate job, hissed the dragon nastily, but one that I am particularly good at. A small incision at the back of the neck. He gestured in Hiccup's neck. A swift stroke downward, then flick it out. It's practically painless. For me. The dragon's eyes lit up with the purest pleasure. Hiccup was thinking very fast indeed. There's nothing like staring death in the face for speeding up your thoughts. What did he know about dragons that could work against an invincible monster like this one? You could see the dragon motivation page he had written in his mind's eye. Gratitude. Dragons never grateful. Fear. Clearly hopeless. Greed. Not a good idea to appeal to at this particular point in time. Vanity and revenge. Could be useful, but he couldn't quite think how. That left jokes and riddling talk. This dragon looked a bit exalted for jokes, but from his manner of talking, he clearly fancied himself as a bit of a philosopher. Maybe Hiccup could buy himself some time if he engaged him in a riddling conversation. I've heard of singing for your supper, said Hiccup, but what is a singing supper? A good question, said the dragon in surprise. An excellent question, in fact. He drew back his claws and Hiccup sighed with relief. It's a long time since the supper has shown such intelligence. They're generally too bound up with their little lives to bother with the really big questions. Now, let me think, said the dragon, and as he thought, he forked a protesting sheep on the end of a talon, then chewed on it reflectively. Hiccup was sorry for the sheep, but deeply grateful that it wasn't him disappearing down the ravenous reptilian gullet. How shall I put it? To a brain so much smaller and less clever than mine, the thing is, we are all, in a sense, supper. Walking, talking, breathing, suppers. That's what we are. Take you, for instance. You are about to be eaten by me. So that makes you supper. That's obvious. But even a murderous carnivore like myself will be a supper for worms one day. We're all snatching precious moments from the peaceful jaws of time, said the dragon cheerfully. That's why it's so important, he continued, for the supper to sing as beautifully as it can. He gestured to his stomach from where the voice could still be heard singing, though more and more faintly. Humans can be bland, but if you have some salt to hand, a little bit of brine will make them taste divine. That particular supper, said the dragon, that you hear singing now was a dragon rather smaller than me, but very full of himself. I ate him about half an hour ago. Isn't that cannibalism? Asked Hiccup. It's delicious, said the dragon. Besides, you can't call an artist like myself a cannibal. He sounded a bit exasperated now. You are very rude for such a small person. What do you want, little supper? I have come, said Hiccup, to find out whether you come in peace or in war. Oh, peace, I think, said the dragon. I am going to kill you, though, he added. All of us? Asked Hiccup. You first, said the dragon kindly, and then everybody else when I've had a little nap and got my appetite back. It takes a little while to wake up completely from a sleep coma. But it's also unfair, said Hiccup. Why do you get to eat everybody just because you're bigger than everybody else? It's the way of the world, said the dragon. Besides, you'll find that you come round to my point of view once you're inside me. That's the marvelous thing about digestion. But where are my manners? Let me introduce myself. I am the Green Death. What is your name, little supper? Hiccup Horrendous Haddock the Third, said Hiccup. And the most extraordinary thing happened. As Hiccup said his name, the Green Death trembled, as if a sudden wind had made him shiver. Neither the Green Death nor Hiccup noticed. Said the Green Death. I'm sure I've heard that name somewhere before, but it's rather a mouthful, so I shall just call you Little Supper. Now, Little Supper, before I eat you, tell me your problem. My problem? Asked Hiccup. That's right, said the dragon. Your why can't I be more like my father problem. Your it's hard to be a hero problem. Your snot lout would make a better chief than me problem. I have helped the problems of many a supper. Somehow meeting a really big problem like myself seems to put everything else in proportion. Let me get this straight, said Hiccup. You know all about my father and me not being a hero and everything? I can see things like that, said the Green Death modestly. And you want me to tell you my problems and then you're going to eat me? We're back at the beginning again, sighed the Green Death. We're all going to be eaten sometime. You can win yourself some extra time, though, if you're a smart little crab stick. A few scraps from the burning. The Green Death yawned. Ugh, I'm suddenly rather tired. he said. You are a clever little crab stick. You've kept me talking for ages. And the dragon yawned again. I'm too tired to eat you right now. You'll have to come back in a couple of hours, and I'll tell you how to deal with your problem then. I have a feeling I can help you. And the terrible monster really did fall asleep this time and snored most heavily. His great claws relaxed and fell open, and the remaining sheep, their woolly sides trembling with terror, scrambled over the tops of the terrible talons and bolted up the cliff path. Hiccup stood watching the dragon thoughtfully for a second. Then he trudged slowly back through the heather toward the village. Everybody cheered when he walked through the gates. He was carried shoulder high and sat down in front of his father. Well, son, said Stoic, does the beast come peace or in war? He says he comes in peace, said Hiccup. There were huge hurrahs and every heavy stamping of feet. Hiccup held up his hand for silence. He's still going to kill us, though. Chapter 13. When yelling doesn't work. The dragon slept on as the Council of War argued about what to do next. I'm going to write a strongly worded letter to Professor Yarmish, said Stoke the Vast. This book needs a lot more words to tell you what to do if yelling doesn't work. Which shows how cross Stoic was. He never wrote a letter if he could help it. Stoic, in fact, was really rattled for the first time in his life. This is what comes of not following the law, he thought to himself. If I had banished the boys last night like I should have done, they would not be here to die with the rest of us. I should have put my trust in Thor. Mugadon, the meathead, had not yet realized the gravity of the situation. He thought it was a question of constructing some sort of megaphone machine to make the yell sound bigger. A gigantic dragon just needs a gigantic yell, he said. We already tried that, oh plankton brain, said Stoic. Who are you calling plankton brain? Demanded Mugadon, and they went whisker to whisker like a couple of furious walruses. Hiccup sighed and walked out of the village. He had a feeling the grown-ups weren't going to come up with anything fiendishly clever. To Hiccup's surprise, he was followed not only by Fishlegs, but by all the novices from both the hooligan and the meathead tribes. They stood around Hiccup in a semicircle. So, Hiccup, said Thuggery the meathead, what are we going to do now then? What do you mean by asking Hiccup? Demanded Snotlout crossly. You're not going to ask the useless to get us out of this mess, are you? He just single-handedly got us all to fail the final initiation test. We were about to be banished and eaten by cannibals all because of him. He can't even control a dragon the size of an earwig. Can you talk to dragons then, Snotface? Asked Fishlegs. I am pleased to say I cannot, said Snotlout with dignity. Well, shut up then, said Fishlegs. Snotlout got a hold of Fishlegs by the arm and started twisting. Nobody tells Snotface Snotlout to shut up, hissed Snotlout. I do, said Thuggery the meathead. He grabbed Snotlout by the shirt and lifted him clear off the ground. Your dragon got us failed just as much as his. I didn't notice anybody's dragon sitting up and begging like a good boy in the middle of that dragon fight. You shut up, or I'll tear you limb from limb and feed you to the gulls, you winkle-hearted seaweed brain limpet-eating pig. Snotlout looked into Thuggery's stern little eyes. Snotlout, shut up. Thuggery dropped him and wiped his hands disdainfully on his tunic. Anyway, said Thuggery, My father was on that silly council of elders too. I'm with Hiccup. What kind of father puts his silly laws before the life of his son? And what kind of silly test was that anyway? If we have all those silly people from a real dragon like this one, maybe they'll let us into their silly tribe after all. Well, thought Hiccup. This is a turn up for the books. Maybe that dragon was right and he's going to help me with my it's a hard to be a hero problem. Before he eats me, of course. One solo meeting with the Green Death, and here were 19 young barbarians, most of them much bigger and tougher and rougher than Hiccup, looking at Hiccup expectantly to tell them what to do. Hiccup stood on tiptoe and tried to look like a hero. Okay, said Hiccup. I need some time to think. Hey, yo, give the boy some room here, yelled Thuggery, pushing all the others back. He swept off a rock for Hiccup to sit on. You just do all the thinking you need, boyo, said Thuggery. This is a situation that needs a lot of thought, and I have a feeling you're the only one here who can do it. Anybody who can have a 20-minute conversation with a winged shark the size of a planet and come out alive is a better thinker than I am. Hiccup found himself warming to Thuggery the meathead. Quiet, yelled Thuggery. Hiccup is thinking. Hiccup thought and thought. After about a half an hour, Thuggery said, whatever you're thinking about to get rid of that monster better work for both of them. There's another dragon? Asked Hiccup. Thuggery nodded. I went up to the highest point and spotted him while you were having your chat with the big green one. Okay, said Hiccup. That's good news, actually. Let's check out the new horror. The trail up to the highest point was littered with scallop shells and dolphin bones thrown up by the gigantic storm. Along the way, they even passed the wreck of one of Stoick's favorite ships, the Pure Adventure, lost at sea 7 years before, and now perched crazily on a rock 3/4 of the way up to the biggest hill on Burke. Once you were right at the top, it was impossible to see most of Burke's coastline and the sea encircling you on all sides. Right at the other end of the island, a dragon entirely filled up Unlandable Cove and spilled over the sides. He was resting his vast wicked chin on the cliff as a pillow. Great plumes of violet smoke were belching out of his snoring nostrils. He was another sea dragonus giganticus maximus, this time a glorious deep purple in color and, if anything, slightly larger than one at the Long Beach. The purple death, I presume, whispered Hiccup shakily. This is just what we need. Are you sure there aren't any more? Thuggery laughed, slightly hysterically. I think it's just the 2 nightmares killing machines. 2? Not enough for you? Back at the highest point, Hiccup outlined his plan of action. It was fiendishly clever, if a bit desperate. We aren't big enough to fight these dragons, said Hiccup, but they can fight each other. We have to get them really angry at one another. We hooligans will concentrate on the green death, and you meatheads will deal with the purple death. The one thing we will need is our own dragons who seem to have disappeared, said Hiccup, so we better start calling for them. They started calling for their dragons as loudly as they dared, and then louder still as there was no response. The 20 dragons that belonged to the novices were not, in fact, very far away at all. They had made up after the dragon fight and were now hiding in a piece of boggy bracken about 100 yards or so away from where the boys were standing on the highest point. They were crouching like giant cats in the ferns, wicked eyes gleaming. They were now so exactly the shade of a clump of a bracken that they seemed to have melted entirely into the bog. If you had been A rabbit or a deer, you would not have noticed them until you felt the talons on your back and the hot fire on your neck. They had been following the boys for a while. So, whispered Fireworm, her tongue flickering menacingly. What do we do now then? The power is shifting on this island. The masters will not be masters for much longer. They are trapped like lobsters in a pot. We are not. We can fly whenever we want. Do we obey or do we desert? Dragons are not the sort of creatures to back a loser. Whatever we do, grumbled Brightclaw, let's do it quickly. My wings are freezing up. We could kill the boys now and take them as an offering to the new master, suggested Sea Slug with a grunt of greedy pleasure. What? That great green devil on the beach? Said Horror Cow placidly. I don't like the look of him myself. He has too big an appetite. We might find ourselves as a next offering. Why fly then? Said Brightclaw, and the others murmured their agreement. Silence, hissed Fireworm. These islands are perilous. She sneered. We might fly from one danger straight into the mouth of another. I say we obey until we are sure that they have lost. When that time comes, I'll give the signal for us to desert. And so, as from nowhere, Fireworm and Sea Slug, Horror Cow and Killer, Brightclaw and Alligator, and all the other dragons flew out their hiding place and came circling slowly up to the highest point, landing on each boy's outstretched arm. Last of all came Toothless, complaining horribly. Dragons, said Hiccup, and he explained the fiendishly clever plan. The fiendishly clever plan. The dragons protested a bit, but the boys yelled them into line, all except for Toothless, who absolutely refused to join in. You must be joking, sneered the little dragon. I refuse to go anywhere near a sea dragonus giganticus maximus. Those things are dangerous. I shall stay here and watch you all. Hiccup coaxed and bribed and threatened in vain. You see, said Snotlout, the useless can't even get his own dragon to carry out his pathetic plan. And this is a person you are baking on to get you out of the mess? Ugh, said Dog Breath to the Brain. Oh, shut up, Snotlout, chorused the rest of the boys. Hiccup sighed and gave up. Okay then, Toothless. You just stay here and miss all the fun. Now, I want everybody to go down to the gull's nesting place and collect as many bird feathers as you can for the feather bombs. Bird feathers? Scoffed Snotlout. This wimp thinks you can fight an animal like that with bird feathers? Cold steel is the only language a creature like that will understand. Dragons have a tendency to asthma, explained Hiccup. It's all that fire breathing they do. The smoke gets in their lungs. So you think this monster is going to die from asthma right then and there because of a few feather bombs? Why not just feed him fried herring and see whether he drops dead of a heart attack in 20 years or so? Jeered Snotlout. No, said Hiccup patiently. The feather bombs are just to make him very confused so he won't kill anybody on the way. Snotlout, thuggery. I'm going to need to coach Fireworm and Killer and what they have to say, continued Hiccup. I'm not putting my dragon at risk in this crazy plan, said Snotlout. Oh, yes, you are, hissed Thuggery through gritted teeth, brandishing a massive fist at Snotlout. This guy is such a pain, Hiccup. I don't know how you put up with him. Listen, snot features. By some miracle, you have got yourself a reasonable dragon. You get that dragon and do what Hiccup wants, or it'll give me much pleasure to personally put you all the way to Porpoise Point and back again. Okay then, said Snotlout crossly. But don't blame me when we all get barbecued because of the uselessest mad idea. Hiccup supervised the making of the feather bombs. The boys gathered great armfuls of feathers from the gulls' nesting place. They then burgled every item of material they could find. Goggletoe's nappies, Gobber's pajamas, Mugadoon the meathead's tent, Balarama's undergarments, anything they could get their hands on. The grown-ups were too busy consulting amongst themselves to take any notice. Snotlout cheered up a bit because he could show off his superior skill of burglary. He managed to steal Bagabum's knickers right off of him as he was standing in a huddle discussing a plan of action. Bagabum didn't notice, not even when he reached a hairy hand down to scratch. He was too busy talking about bigger and better methods of yelling. The boys then wrapped the feathers up in the material so that they would fly out when the bomb was dropped. Each team of 10 boys was armed with about 100 of these feather bombs wrapped in a great parcel made out of an old sail. Hiccup led the hooligans toward the Long Beach, while Thuggery took the meatheads to Unlandable Cove. The thin column of boys were excitedly chattering as they set off behind Hiccup. Warty Hog and Clueless dragging the sail at the rear, the dragons circling and diving a couple of feet above their heads. Vikings are particularly fearless, having been bred to be soldiers, so even Hiccup and Fishlegs had a surge of excitement at the thought of the battle to come. But as soon as the monsters came into sight again, the boys and the dragons instantly dropped to their tummies and squirmed forward, hearts beating hard. It was impossible that anything could be that big. Hiccup led them as near as he dared to the edge of the cliffs surrounding the Long Beach. They looked down at the terrible creature snoring in front of them. His nostrils alone were as big as 6 front doors, and the stench reeking out of them made it difficult for the boys to breathe. Warty Hog, who had always had a delicate stomach, threw up disgustingly in the heather. Hiccup, Fishlegs, and Clueless unwrapped the feather bombs and gave one to each boy. The boys called their dragons as softly as they could, and each put a feather bomb in their dragon's mouth. They then stood up on the edge of the cliff with their dragons on their outstretched arms. This took about the same amount of bravery it might take for you to leap off a mountain at 1,000 feet. Even with the monster fast asleep, the natural reaction was to keep hidden in the bracken. Hiccup tried not to breathe in. He lifted his arm to give the command to begin. Go, whispered Hiccup. Go, yelled back the boys, and 10 dragons flew up and circled around the fast sleeping head. Just as the Green Death inhaled, Hiccup shouted, No! And the dragons let go of the feather bombs. The Green Death took in breath that was half air and half feathers. He woke with a gigantic sneeze, and as he shuddered and coughed, Fireworm, who was treading air near the right ear, gave a speech which went something like this, but a lot more irritating. Greetings, O sea dragoness, Pusillanimous Minimus, from the father, the terror of the seas. He is feeling like feasting on the barbarians. If you get in his way, he will feast on you. Swim away, little sea slug, and you will be safe. But stay on this island, and you will feel the sharpness of his claws and the fierceness of his fire. The giant green monster tried to laugh sarcastically and cough at the same time, but this is virtually impossible, and a feather went down the wrong way, making him cough even more. Then Fireworm bit him on the nose. It must have felt like a flea bite, but the monster was outraged. Through streaming eyes, the Green Death made a swipe at this irritating dragon flea and missed. One giant claw tore down part of the cliff face instead. The 9 other dragons had by this time returned to collect more feather bombs from the boys on the cliffs. No! Yelled Hiccup, and with split-second timing, they let their bombs fly. They hit their target of the Green Death's nostrils, and he collapsed with coughing again. You cannot win, puny worm, cried Fireworm. Wriggle back to the sea where you belong, and let my master have his supper. Now the Green Death was really cross. He bounded lopsidedly after Firearm, trying to bat away this irritating little speck of a dragon with his claws. But the Green Death had the same sort of difficulty in catching Firearm as you might have if you tried to catch a firefly with your bare hands. Dragons are better than humans at that sort of game, but the Green Death kept on missing because his eyes were streaming so much. Missed again, sneered Firearm, enjoying herself hugely, as she flapped just out of reach of the Green Death's claws. The Green Death made another wild leap toward her as Firearm flew on around the corner of the cliffs, steering the monster in the direction of Unlandable Cove. Hiccup and the boys ran after them as fast as they could, but they hadn't a hope of keeping up. Running through the heather is not unlike running through knee-deep molasses, and they kept disappearing up to their knees in the bog. As Firearm and the monster got farther and farther ahead in their race along the shoreline, it took longer and longer for the other dragons to fly back to the boys and return with more feather bombs. The military commanders among you will recognize the kind of problems that ensue when the supply line can no longer reach the forces at the front. Eventually, it was taking so long to reload that there came a moment when there was no more feathers tickling the Green Death's nostrils, and his eyes stopped streaming, and suddenly he could see the maddening Fireworm pinpoint clear. The Green Death made a lightning reflex swipe at the red dragon, caught her in one gigantic claw. It was lucky for Fireworm that at that very moment, the Purple Death came crashing around the corner and struck the Green Death heavily in the stomach. His grip loosened on Fireworm for a second, and she flew off, panting with relief. The Green Death sat down heavily in the sea and fought for breath. The Purple Death did much the same. The chapter 15, the battle at Death's Headland. Ooh, that was a mouthful. While Hiccup and his team had been enraging the Green Death, Thuggery and his team had been infuriating the Purple Death. The two monsters ran smack into one another as they met the corner of Death's Headland. One of Fireworm's wings was broken in two places from her experience in the Green Death's grip, but she bravely flew back and made her final speech into his ear as he sat gasping for air in the shallows. "Here he is," shouted Fireworm, "my master, the Purple Horror, who will tear you limb from limb and spit out your toenails." And Fireworm flew away lopsidedly as fast as she could, with one wing trailing behind her. The Green Death was having a bad day. Ordinarily, a sea dragonus giganticus maximus would not dream of attacking another animal of the same breed. They avoid fighting each other because they know they are so heavily armed that the battle risks ending in death for both of them. However, the Green Death had been attacked and jeered at by minuscule creatures who had inflamed and outraged his vanity. This creature, who seemed to think he was tougher than the Green Death himself, had struck him heavily in the chest. The Green Death wasn't thinking too hard. He leapt at the Purple Death with his talons outstretched, breathing great bursts of fire which lit up the landscape all around like lightning. The ground and the sea shook in great earthquakes as the two gigantic monsters lunged crazily at each other, swerving the most unrepeatable oaths in dragonese. The Green Death's foot completely destroyed Wrecker's Reef with one blow. The Purple Death's wings caused great landslides to come tumbling down from the headland's cliffs. Now that their job was done, the Viking boys were running away as fast as they could, their eyes popping with terror in case one of the dragons survived the fight. Every now and then they looked back to see how the battle was going. With ghastly, eerie cries, the dragons slashed and bit and tore pieces off of one another. The sea dragon is the most well-defended creature that has ever lived on this planet. Its skin is over 3 feet thick in places, so encrusted with shells and barnacles that it almost has the effect of armor. It is also the most well-armed creature that has ever lived on this planet, and its razor-sharp claws and teeth can rip open its own iron crest as if it were made out of paper. Now, both dragons had terrible wounds, and their green lifeblood was pouring out of them. The Green Death gripped the Purple Death around the neck with a deadly throat choker grip. The Purple Death hugged the Green Death around the chest with a deadly breath quencher hug. Neither would let go, and the grip of the dragon is a terrible thing. They reminded Hiccup of a picture on one of his father's shields of two dragons forming a perfect circle as they ate one another, each with a tail in its mouth. The dragons thrashed around wildly in the surf, gagging and choking, their eyes popping, their tails causing such tidal waves that the boys were soaked even though they were scrambling away from the headland as fast as they could. Finally, with some last heaving shudders and grim gurgles, both mighty beasts lay still in the water. There was silence. The boys stopped running. They stood gasping for breath, watching the motionless beasts with dread. The boys' dragons, which were flying some way ahead of the boys, also turned and hung still in the air. The terrible creatures didn't move. The boys waited 2 long minutes as waves lapped gently over the great motionless bodies. They're dead, said Thuggery at last. The boys started laughing rather hysterically now that the terror was over. Well done, Hiccup! Thuggery slapped Hiccup on the back. But Hiccup was looking worried. He was squinting his eyes and straining to hear something. I can't hear anything, said Hiccup anxiously. You can't hear anything because they're dead, said Thuggery joyfully. 3 cheers for Hiccup! Halfway through the boys' cheering, Fireworm let out a terrible noise. Dessert! She shrieked. Dessert, 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 dessert! The head of the corpse of the Green Death was slowly lifting up and turning in their direction. Uh-oh, said Hiccup. Chapter 16. The fiendishly clever plan goes wrong. Hiccup had been listening for the Green Death's death song, but he wasn't singing yet. The Green Death was dying, but he wasn't dead yet. What he was very, very angry indeed. Out of his bleeding mouth, he hissed wickedly, Where is he? And then he heaved himself onto his feet and hissed a little more strongly, Where is he? Where is the little supper? I knew I recognized him. He was my doom, no wonder. The little supper has made a supper of me, the Green Death himself. As the dragon spoke, he was inching forward very slowly and painfully, his eyes fixed on the cliff top, where he could see little human beings beginning to run inland again. The dragon threw back his head and screamed a blood-chilling scream of pure horrid revenge, dark and torturous. I'll supper him before I go. I will, said the dragon. And he leaped forward. Run! Shouted Hiccup, but everybody was already running as fast as they could. In the distance, Hiccup could see 400 warriors from the tribes of Hooligan and Meathead coming toward them with the highest point. They must have wondered at the boys' absence and come out to find them. But they won't get here in time, thought Hiccup. And even if they do, what can they do? Just then, the dragon landed with a crash on the cliff top, and suddenly the sun was blotted out. 20 boys ran toward the shelter of the ferns. The dragon picked up the nearest with one claw and turned him over. It was Dog's Breath. By the time the dragon had tossed him aside, muttering, Not you. The other boys had disappeared into the bracken. The dragon was sick, but he laughed weakly. You're not safe there. Oh, no. For though I can see you to kill you, I can use my fire. The bracken caught fire with the dragon's first breath, and the boys ran out of it as fast as they could. Hiccup stayed in a little longer because he knew the dragon was waiting for him. Finally, the heat became unbearable, and he took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and ran out into the open. He had run hardly 100 yards before 2 of the dragon's talons closed around his middle, and he was lifted up, way, way up, so the other boys looked like a little specks beneath him. The dragon held Hiccup up in front of him. We are both supper now, little supper. he said, and he tossed Hiccup high, high into the air. As Hiccup somersaulted for the second time, he thought to himself, no, this is the worst moment of my life. Then he was falling. He looked down. There was the dragon's mouth, wide open like a great black carnivorous tunnel. He was going to fall into it. And that's where we will leave Hiccup. Chapter 17 is called In the Mouth of a Dragon. Whew. Oh my goodness. Hiccup is in so much trouble. Where's Toothless? Toothless is gone. He's letting Hiccup die and go into the mouth of a dragon. He'll have no more master. Where will Hiccup go? Is he going to go with the other dragons? Is he going to go off by himself? What will he do? What's Hiccup going to do? Oh no, this is terrible, terrible. Well, tomorrow I will read the very last chapters of How to Train Your Dragon and see if Toothless helps in any way or he flees. And if Hiccup does get digested in the monstrous dragon, you'll have to find out on Friday. Okay, gotta go, guys. Mwah, bye-bye.